So for today's Adult Writers Club lesson, we are actually having an in-person meeting. So if you can make it to the in-person meeting from 8 to 9 p.m. today at meeting room 1, I would love to see you there. It would be absolutely fantastic. However, I'm also going to be posting this earlier in the day just in case you cannot make it to the in-person writing group. However, if you cannot make it to the in-person writing group, that's why I'm doing this lesson, is because primarily I will be helping edit and workshop your pieces and discussing questions. So as a result, if you have any questions, please feel free to email me or leave a comment with your question below. But I'm going to be talking about self-editing tips and tricks. Here are some things that I do. Here are some things that I do as a professional editor, but unfortunately I would say that getting a professional editing certification/degree is essential to be making it be the best it can be, but these will definitely help get you closer to that and will definitely make your editor or future publisher/editor incredibly happy to see these things, because these are marks of a good writer. As a result, let's dive into self-editing tips and tricks. Alright, the first thing that you're going to run into is that you have written this and worked on this forever, right? And this has become so precious to you. It's like your baby or your child or your most precious puppy, whatever you want to look at it as. But you have put so much work into this, you don't want to ruin it, you don't want to tear it apart, you don't want to think badly of it. So we tend to or you get bored of it and you're like, I've read it 7 times and I'm completely and utterly not wanting to touch it anymore. And that's perfectly okay, that happens. But here's some ways to combat that. First of all, take a break. Do not self-edit if you've just barely finished your piece, unless it is due for an assignment because you're in college or something the next day. Elsewise, take some time off. I'd say a week minimum, week and a half maximum. You don't want to do longer than a week and a half, generally, unless you have some issues, life-wise, mental health, etc. That's perfectly fine to take a week and a half break, but if you take longer than a week and a half, then sometimes you can put it off forever, which isn't good either. So I'd say a week minimum to a week and a half maximum. Then, the best way to dive back in after you've taken that break, if you're still having trouble, would be change the font. Whether that's the actual font, you change it from Times New Roman to some fancy cursive font that you want to read, or change the color or the size so it's larger or smaller. You can do whatever you'd like, just make sure that you change it back when you finish. But this will help give a new texture to it. And you can even do all 3 of these if you want. You can make it pink, cursive, 14-point font. For some reason I couldn't think of a different one than 12-point. And that'll help you look at it in a different way. It'll help you adjust to the fact that, yes, this is my work, but it feels like it's not your work because it doesn't look the way you had it look before. The next thing I would recommend, highly recommend, is read your work aloud to someone and edit it as you go. Print it out or keep it up on your screen and have your pen ready if it's printed, or have your fingers on the keys as you go, and then read it aloud to that person. Make sure that it's someone you trust, but that is also going to give you an honest opinion, or at least as honest as they can. So someone who's kind but honest. Read it aloud to them. They might notice things that you don't notice. You might notice things as you're reading it aloud that typically you might not notice elsewise. I've caught so many mistakes even just in my actual job as an editor. The more I read scenes aloud, if things sound funny in my head and then I read them aloud, I can generally find what's wrong with the sentence. Now, this might not work for everyone, but it does work a lot of times. Other things to watch out for: telling instead of showing. Now, telling is when it reads like a textbook. You're stating facts. I have brown hair. I have blue eyes. I am so happy because I am going to school today. That's fine if you're writing for 9-year-olds and below, generally. However, if you're writing anything above 9 years old, 10 and up, I would say generally showing instead of telling is going to be your absolute best friend. And with that, showing looks more like she ran her fingers through her black curly hair and her blue eyes seemed to sparkle with mischief. Now that gives action and emotion to the descriptions. As a result, it doesn't read like a textbook, it reads like a detailed, world-built sentence. You can tell that there's more to it than that. You can also do this to help portray setting, not just the character. Instead of saying, we are in a courtyard, you can say, the vines in the courtyard curled around us as the breeze whispered through the wind. Like, that helps give it far more context, helps it feel far more real and feel far more immersive, rather than like you're reading facts on a page. If you have any other questions about showing versus telling, I'd be more than happy to do a lesson on showing versus telling. Just leave a comment below that you would like that. Then the next thing that you're going to want to look at is your first line. And by first line, I mean first line. I know a lot of people say, oh, well, the hook is the first paragraph. No. That might be true in academic writing. That might be true with some stories with a big underlined, bold, like, very rarely. If the first line does not hook the reader, the likelihood that they will keep reading that first paragraph and keep reading that first page to get to the interesting bit is really slim. Not none, but really slim. As a result, you want to make sure that it's compelling, and you want to make sure that this is the same for your prologue as well as your first chapter if you have a prologue. Why? Because some people skip over the prologue. So if you have a killer first line in your prologue and then your first sentence of your first chapter is boring, you're likely to lose readers, because the likelihood that they're going to skip the prologue, unfortunately, is about 50-50. I'll be honest, I run into just as many people that skip it as read it, which is so sad because it's generally important. People put the prologue in there for a reason, but hey, whatever. That's their choice, right? But as a result, you need to compensate for that. You need to make sure your prologue has a killer first line and your first chapter. With that being said, make sure that your first line is compelling enough to keep people reading. Have a couple people who you trust to be honest but kind, look over your first sentence, and if you can, I would honestly recommend doing a few strangers too, which sounds weird, but like, by strangers I mean like you don't know your best friend's cousin or something like that. So like they know them, but you don't know them. So not a total stranger, but like you don't know them personally. And the reason why is because of the fact that if they are your friend or your family, even if they say, hey, I will tell you the truth, you honestly can't tell them to be completely truthful when it comes to giving their opinion, because they have a natural bias, because they care about you. Now, if you're a professional editor, that's a different story, because generally you can put your own biases aside, whether they're your friend or not. But if you're not a professional, you got to make sure that you find someone who is slightly estranged from you. That, like I said, your best friend's cousin, your cousin's cousin, something that, or not even a cousin, your aunt's nephew, something like that. Just make it so that when they read it, they do not have anything invested in this. They're like, I don't know this person. All I've been told is read this first line and tell them if it's interesting. Then you're more likely to get a more realistic, honest opinion. A lot of your friends might say, oh yeah, that's a great first line, but a stranger might say, it's okay, but... So you gotta be aware of the fact that there will be biases, and you need to be cautious of that. Alright. The next point I would say is to if you have finished your short story, I should preface, if you finished your short story or your novel, this is a great step to take, and that is putting it into the 7-point plot structure if you haven't already. And the reason I say that is because this helps show two things: whether you have a plot and it has any holes, or B, if your subplot ate your main plot halfway through the thing. And I will explain what I mean here in a second. So, if your subplot eats your main plot, that usually means that the theme changes. For example, Billy Bob has X goal to, I don't know, be the leader of his spaceship team. And then this gets thwarted by the fact that so-and-so gets promoted. And then all of a sudden, the goal completely changes to he wants to be in love with this other girl and completely derails everything, and you just follow the romance from that point on. That's not a plot. That's two different plots that got intersected. And subplots are meant to be parallel, not woven together. So if you have a subplot, you need to make sure that the subplot has its own plot and the main plot has its own plot, and then they run parallel, that they don't have one completely eat the other. I've been thinking about doing a video on that later, so again, comment down below or email if you think you'd be interested in talking about ways to avoid the subplot dragon, as I call it, where it just completely takes over and eats your main plot. Meanwhile, the 7-point story structure, you can look it up. Just search Google Images 7-point story structure. It says it's by Dan Wells, but Dan Wells actually admits he got it from a role-playing game, so technically it's not his. With the 7 points, it has your basics. Hook, what makes the reader ask what happens next? And yes, this is a plot point here, but when we were talking about it earlier, the hook is the first sentence when you're talking about the first page. So it depends on what you're talking about. The second plot point is the result of the inciting incident and starts the journey. Then you have the third plot point, also known as the first pinch point. Protagonist is put under pressure and the villain is generally introduced. Then you have the midpoint. The protagonist moves from reaction to action. Then you have the pinch point, the second part. The protagonist fails or falls off of glory, all is lost, provides fuel to get to number 6. Number 6 is the second section of the plot where everything comes together, the hero can fight/win, they've obtained what they need to win, and then the resolution is the end goal of the novel, the end journey/conclusion. If you can fit your novel within this structure and you don't see a subplot dragon seeping through the cracks, that is really good. And if you see any plot holes and you're like, I don't actually have a first pinch point, that would be something to reconsider and go back and see if you can rewrite that in there. The next point is to watch out for Mary Sue or Marty Stu characters. Basically just ensure there are try-fail cycles. And by try-fail cycles, I mean multiple. I don't mean, poof, they really tried hard with that thing and it didn't work out, and then the next time they try, it's perfect. No. No one ever does that. Rarely does that happen. Maybe it happens once in a lifetime. Usually you have to try at least, I would say for me, 10, 20, 30 times before I finally succeed at something. And maybe you don't show 10, 20, 30 times, but you have to show at least a minimum of 5, I would say. And they have to be genuine failures. They can't just be like, oh, well, I give up. It has to be like, dang it, I keep trying, but I can't quite make this work. That frustration will make it all the sweeter when they are victorious in the end. And I would say they can be small failures, but make sure that they're not so small that whatever great thing you have coming, it's proportionate. So if you have a very big victory coming at the end, then you need to make sure that the failures leading up to that are proportionate to that big thing. They're big failures. Whereas if it's a small thing, you need to make sure they're little small failures instead of huge failures and then, oh, this tiny little success. It feels awkward. It reads funny. Alright. Next thing I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, is read things aloud to ensure that the grammar flows the way it's supposed to. Now this is a trick I use all the time as an editor. Sometimes things sound funny when you read them aloud because the grammar isn't quite where it's supposed to be. And if you put the grammar where it's supposed to be, you should be able to read it out loud, no problems. And so with that, you need to make sure you check and recheck your grammar. And reading it aloud can be a really great way to do that. The last point that I have for you guys today is if you have a magic system or science fiction rules, you make sure you follow all those rules. And if you break those rules, either fix the break or change your rule. And by change your rule, I mean go back and change your rule. Don't Deus Ex Machina your way out of that situation. There's another video I have on that if you are interested in what I mean by that. We can talk more about that later, but in general, rules are very important to a magic system and a science fiction system. So if you have any, make sure you follow those rules. All right. Thank you so much, and if you were not able to come to the meeting from 8 to 9 today, I am sad that I'll miss you, but I'm so glad that you were able to watch this video. Thank you for watching these YouTube videos, and if you are coming from 8 to 9 tonight, I hope to see you there. Bye!